Well, it seems like the whole world's upset about something. We'll talk about it on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, Chuck Holton here. Welcome to this edition of the Hot Zone podcast, where we don't just make the news, we make the news better. While the entire news cycle in the U.S. right now is pretty much dedicated to the death of some billionaire pedophile, around the world people are hurting. And there are new threats popping up every day. So we're going to cover that if you don't mind. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/hotzone and subscribe, or send a donation to hotzoneholton@gmail.com via PayPal. So you'll have to excuse me. I've been on a whole lot of airplanes in the last couple of days, and my voice is just shot from all the dry air. But sorry about that. Deal with it. I am. But I'm very glad to be home. And I also have a huge announcement to make. The Hot Zone podcast is teamed up with my friend Victor Marks and All Things Possible Ministries. And what that means for you is that your donations from now on can be tax deductible. Just go to victormarks.com/hotzone and donate there. If you're not familiar with Victor and his organization, go back to watch episode 99, where I interviewed him all about the great stuff he and his team are doing all around the world with high-risk missions. And I run into him in various hot zones, and I can tell you, this guy's the real deal. Well, my dad used to say, everybody's got to have something to gripe about. And I think that's never been more true than it is right now, as the whole world seems to be up in arms about something. On my recent 3-week trip to Nigeria, South Africa, and Afghanistan, for example, there were big protests taking place every place I went. In Nigeria, it was the Shia Muslims protesting against the government, claiming discrimination. They kept shutting down the center of the capital city, Abuja, while I was there, and it really made the already difficult traffic there even worse. The government in Nigeria doesn't play, though, and so a lot of protesters ended up getting shot, and unfortunately one young journalist was also killed in the crossfire. Now, if we move on to South Africa, they're facing a migrant crisis similar to that of the United States. In South Africa, hundreds of thousands of North Africans from Nigeria, Cameroon, Zambia, Lesotho, and elsewhere are flooding in every year for the, wait for it, generous social welfare benefits offered for refugees. It's like the governments just can't grasp the fact that anytime you give away free money, people are going to get in line for that money. Well, these Africans aren't content to just suck off the government teat. They also are known for lots and lots of criminal activity. The culture there could be summed up by the motto, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. And so tens of thousands of migrants are setting up shop in downtown Johannesburg's commercial district and elsewhere, and they're selling counterfeit goods on the street. Now, while I was there, the government sent in the police to confiscate these illegal products, and that caused riots that really looked like a zombie apocalypse movie. I put some of it on Facebook. It's amazing footage. By the way, if you're not watching the podcast, you're missing out on a lot, as I'm putting tons of work into showing you what's going on, not just telling you what's going on. And right now, I'm showing clips of the protest in Johannesburg, and it's incredible, believe me. So go back and watch that on YouTube. In Afghanistan, where I was embedded with U.S. forces last week, angry mourners were protesting airstrikes as violence in the capital city of Kabul has been heating up. The country's in the midst of a presidential campaign, and the Taliban has been blowing up things on a very regular basis, almost daily. The body count is getting incredibly high. They do that to prove that they're ready to have a ceasefire, I guess. I don't understand. But of course, CNN's reporting last month was that the U.S. and coalition forces, along with the Afghan army, are killing more people than the Taliban are. Leave it to CNN to do whatever they can to tarnish the image of our men and women in uniform. Buried in their own article, however, are stats that show only 14% of the casualties in Afghanistan this year have come from airstrikes. And the U.S. isn't out on patrol participating in a whole lot of ground engagements. So they sort of self-refute on that one, which is typical for CNN. All right, who's next? How about Brazil, where protests erupted last week after an 18-year-old student was hit by a stray bullet on his way to school? He's just the latest victim of the city's ongoing warfare. Dozens of angry residents from the favela where the shooting happened on Friday took to the streets and blocked the road where Gabriel Ferreira Alves died waiting for the bus that would take him to school. A police statement on the matter said that officers of a small unit stationed in that favela were attacked by criminals but did not retaliate. Some residents, however, told the Associated Press that there had been an exchange of fire between the criminals and the police. Fogo Cruzado, which is a group that monitors shootings in the Rio area, says 110 people have been killed by stray bullets this year. Hit by stray bullets, and only 31 of those have died. Moving north, hundreds of Hondurans took to the streets on the capital capital Tegucigalpa on Friday, demanding the resignation of Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernández. Former President Manuel Zelaya and the leader of the Libertad y Refundación, which they call the Libre Party, called on his supporters to take part in the demonstration, demanding Hernández stand down. The protest follows a series of anti-government demonstrations that have intensified over the last few weeks after Hernández was linked to drug trafficking by the U.S. and prosecutors and accused of receiving illicit funds for his 2013 political campaign. Now, this is kind of interesting because the Libre Party certainly is not squeaky clean in this matter by any way, shape, or form. Now, U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is planning a visit to Honduras pretty soon, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes. The political crisis in Honduras dates back to the overthrow of President Zelaya back in 2009, which was opposed, if I remember correctly, by the Obama administration. And the great polarization of that society followed. During the 2013 elections, Zelaya and his Libre Party campaigned for Zelaya's wife, the former First Lady, who was defeated by Hernández. Now, President Hernández was reelected in 2017 in a hotly contested election and had supported the coup against Zelaya in 2009. So obviously there's a lot of bad blood there. The Venezuelan government has sent instigators into Honduras to stir up unrest as if they didn't have enough already, and appears to be working. All right, now let's move over to India. How about Kashmir? That disputed sort of semi-autonomous region of northern India that borders Pakistan and China. India sent about 10,000 troops in there last week and revoked that area's self-governing status. That, of course, didn't make people there very happy, and thousands came out to protest. The government claims the region is a hotbed for terrorism and that the move is necessary, but the people obviously don't feel very good about that whole thing. Violent election protests are happening also in Russia right now. On Saturday, tens of thousands of people rallied against their government in one of their biggest political protests in recent years, denouncing the exclusion of opposition parties and independent candidates from Russia's capital city's council ballot. The rally was the fourth consecutive weekend demonstration in Moscow over the local election, and you can see from the footage that the police don't play games there either. After the rally, which was officially sanctioned, hundreds of participants streamed to an area near the presidential administration building to continue with more demonstrations that turned pretty violent. They were confronted there by hundreds of riot police who detained almost 150 people. Now, meanwhile, in nearby there in Moscow, there were cheering fans rather than protesters who came out to support one of the most interesting and, I have to say, manly sports imaginable, a tank biathlon. So get this, teams from Venezuela, Syria, Mongolia, Kazakhstan all took part in a tank biathlon competition in Moscow on Thursday as part of the Army Games 2019 with crews from like 22 countries, including Iran and Venezuela, China, and Russia. Fans from those countries came out to the range to support their teams and watch tanks go through like an obstacle course. And hey, say what you want about the Russians, but these guys really know how to throw a party. In Romania, tens of thousands of protesters came out over the weekend to mark a previous protest that turned violent outside government headquarters in Bucharest. They're protesting corruption in their government, which is a very common theme we're seeing in protests around the globe. If you look over in Hong Kong right now, protests have been going for 9 straight weeks, and they're getting increasingly violent as Chinese forces mass along the border. My friend Michael Yan is there reporting on that and has sent some really compelling video of the violence and the protests. And this may very well turn into a Chinese invasion of Hong Kong before we know it. And I'll be talking about that a lot more in the future. I think I'm going to try to get Michael Yan back on the podcast here pretty soon. Now looking to Italy, Italy's Interior Minister Matteo Salvini has been making waves and causing lots of protests to happen because he specifically signed orders that bar NGO ships that go pick up migrants in Libya and bring them to Italy from docking in their country. He's telling these Norwegian flagged ships, if you really want to save these migrants, then go to Norway. Take them to Norway. Italy is not a dumping ground for the world's migrants. And that's one of the reasons that Salvini is in power, because there's been a dramatic shift to the right in that country because they've been overrun by North African migrants. We have to get governments to learn this lesson, that when you invite people into your country from destitute places, even though, hey, it's great to be a humanitarian, governments cannot be humanitarian, because when they do, they cause more problems than they fix. Humanitarian aid needs to come from the people directly, not from governments. And Matteo Salvini understands this, and he's saying, we're not going to allow these people in. They're not the only one. Malta is not letting them in. Crete's not letting them in. All of those countries along there are saying, we've had enough of these migrants. And so it's causing lots of protests by the left-wing parties, and we're seeing lots of that as well. Now, speaking of corruption in government, there are protests happening right here in Panama today, on Monday, to oppose former President Ricardo Martinelli. He was indicted several years ago after his term ended for corruption and spying on his political opponents, which is bad. After he was extradited back here from Miami last year, he stood trial, but was last week exonerated by the Panamanian Supreme Court. And many people here believe it had a whole lot more to do with his money than his innocence. And so they're out and protesting today. There's a common theme here. Like I said, much of the consternation being seen around the world has to do with corruption, which shows the government, even if it's of the people, by the people, for the people, it's still run by people. And people are fallen human beings. The lesson I take from that is that we should always endeavor to have the smallest, weakest government possible that can still maintain law and order, but not much else. We should never put our hopes in our government. We should only put our hopes in God. When it comes down to it, only turning our hearts toward God will have a long-term impact on human culture. Well, that's all I have for today, folks. Thanks for watching. I've got lots of great stuff coming up this week, so stay tuned. I'm Chuck Holton. You've been watching
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.